My own mother forged my signature on a $2 million life insurance policy just 3 weeks before begging me to donate a kidney to my brother. They were not praying for a successful transplant. They were secretly betting that I would die on the operating table so they could cash out and live like kings. I am shaking as I record this, sitting alone in the dark, realizing that for 32 years, I was never a daughter to them. I was nothing more than a biological spare parts bin created solely to keep their addiction-riddled golden child alive. I have spent my entire life trying to buy their love with my success, only to discover that my value to them was higher dead than alive. Now, I hold the ultimate leverage, the deed to their house, and the power to evict them onto the street. But my heart feels like it has been ripped from my chest. Does sharing blood obligate you to be a martyr for people who would sacrifice you without blinking? How do you heal when the people who were supposed to protect you were actually the ones holding the knife behind your back? I have pulled the trigger on my revenge, but the guilt is suffocating me. Please tell me, did I go too far? Or did I finally give them exactly what they deserved? My name is Hazel Vance. I am 32 years old, the Chief Financial Officer at Sterling & Finch, a mid-sized but aggressively profitable hedge fund in Lower Manhattan. I live in a glass box on the 45th floor overlooking the Hudson River, a place where the air is filtered, the temperature is controlled to a precise 68 degrees, and the silence costs $7,000 a month. From the outside, my life looks like the pinnacle of the American dream. I wear tailored Italian suits that cost more than the car my father drove for a decade. I drink vintage Pinot Noir that breathes in crystal decanters. I have no husband to argue with, no children to clean up after, and absolutely no connection to the messy, impoverished past I clawed my way out of. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. I had just closed a merger that would secure my bonus for the next 3 years. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, swirling the dark red liquid in my glass, watching the city lights flicker like distant, indifferent stars. It was a perfect Stirlippiece. I had engineered this life specifically to be impenetrable. I built walls of money and status so high that the dysfunction of my childhood could not possibly climb over them. But I should have known better. Rot has a way of seeping through the cracks. No matter how much marble you lay over it, the vibration of my phone against the granite kitchen island was a violent intrusion. It buzzed, rattling against the stone, shattering the quiet. I turned slowly, not rushing. My personal cell phone number was a closely guarded secret. Only 5 people had it, and 4 of them were on my payroll. I walked over and looked at the screen. The name flashing there made my stomach drop. A visceral, physical reaction that felt like swallowing ice. Sao Jinghao, Ling, Dva, Mom. I stared at the word. It had been 5 years since I last saw her face, and 2 years since our last brief. Hostile phone call. That call had been about bail money for my older brother. Drew. I had refused. She had screamed that I was heartless. I had hung up. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. My thumb hovered over the decline button. My inner voice, that sharp, cynical narrator that had kept me alive this long, whispered to me, "Do not answer it. Nothing good comes from that area code. It is either a tragedy or a scam. And with them, it is usually both. But curiosity is a dangerous flaw. Or perhaps it was not curiosity. Perhaps it was the deeply ingrained conditioning of a child who spent decades trying to be good enough. Against my better judgment, I slid my thumb across the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not speak first. That is a rule of negotiation I learned on Wall Street. Whoever speaks first loses leverage. Hazel, is that you? The voice was shrill, tight with a panic that sounded performative. My mother, Linda, had always missed her calling as a soap opera actress. Hello, Mother, I said, my voice steady, stripped of any emotion. To what do I owe the pleasure? Oh, thank God, she sobbed. The sound was wet and ragged. Oh, praise Jesus you picked up. I have been praying. Hazel, I have been on my knees praying that your heart would soften. I took a sip of wine, the expensive liquid turning sour in my mouth. Cut to the chase. What happened? Did Drew crash the car again? Did Dad lose his pension at the casino? It is Drew, she choked out, ignoring my sarcasm. But it is not a car accident. It is Sao Jing Hao Ling. Due, oh God. Hazel, he is dying. Your brother is dying. I paused. My eyes drifted to my reflection in the window. A woman in a silk blouse, composed, untouchable. Dying? I repeated, skepticism heavy in my tone. His kidneys. Hazel, both of them. End-stage renal failure. The doctors say, Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than they say if he does not get a transplant. He has maybe months, weeks, even. He is in the hospital right now. He looks so small. Hazel, he is wasting away. I closed my eyes. Drew, wasting away? The last time I saw my brother, he was pushing 300 pounds, screaming at a referee on the television while inhaling a family-sized bucket of fried chicken. The idea of him being frail seemed physically impossible. I am sorry to hear that, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it, though not in the way a sister should. I was sorry in the way you are sorry when you hear about a distant acquaintance having bad luck. It was a polite, detached pity. You have to come home, Linda demanded, the sobbing stopping abruptly as she switched tactics. The shift was jarring but familiar. This was her signature move. The pivot from victim to commander. The family needs you. We need to be together in this time of trial. The Lord is testing us, Hazel, and we cannot fail him. I walked back to the window, looking down at the yellow taxis crawling like beetles through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan. I have a job. Mother, I have responsibilities. I cannot just leave New York because Drew got sick. You would choose money over your own flesh and blood? Her voice rose an octave, trembling with righteous indignation. This is your brother, the boy who protected you on the playground. I almost laughed. Protected me? Drew used to steal my lunch money to buy cigarettes. He used to lock me in the basement when I annoyed him. But in Linda's revisionist history, Drew was a saint, and I was the ungrateful stray cat they had graciously decided to feed. Send me the hospital records, I said coldly. Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than what? If he is dying, there is paperwork. Send me the diagnosis. I want to see the creatinine levels. I want to see the doctor's notes. There was a silence on the other end. A hesitate. Heavy silence. That was the first red flag. If your son is dying, you do not hesitate when someone asks for proof. You throw the proof in their face. We, Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than we are at home now. She stammered. The hospital sent him home to Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than to be comfortable. But Mark is here. Mark says it is bad. Mark, my second brother. The gay son they had effectively disowned until he became a successful plastic surgeon. at which point they decided to tolerate his lifestyle whenever they needed a loan. If Mark was involved, maybe there was some truth to this. I will come, I said, making the decision in a split second. Oh, thank you. Jesus, Linda cried out. I knew you still had a soul in there somewhere. Come home, baby. Come home to where you belong. We will kill the fatted calf. It will be just like the Bible says. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. My hand was shaking slightly as I placed the device back on the counter. Not from fear, from rage. The fatted calf. She was quoting the parable of the prodigal son, but in her twisted version. I was the prodigal returning to bow before the altar of Drew, the golden child who had never left, never succeeded, and never done a single thing to merit the worship he received. I drained the rest of my wine in one gulp. They thought I was coming back out of guilt. They thought the successful, wealthy daughter was finally returning to open her checkbook and save the family from their own incompetence. They thought I was the same terrified little girl who used to hide in the pantry to read books because reading was considered antisocial. They were wrong. I walked into my bedroom, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. I pulled a suitcase from the top of my closet, a sleek, black designer piece that cost more than their entire living room set. As I began to fold my clothes, packing sharp blazers and silk trousers that would look absurd in their crumbling neighborhood, a cold smile touched my lips. I was not going back to save Drew. I did not care if his kidneys worked or not. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure folder labeled Keystone Holdings Limited Liability Company. I clicked on a file I had not opened in 24 months. It was a portable document format document, scanned and notarized. Assignment of mortgage. 2 years ago, when my father stopped paying the mortgage on the family home to cover Drew's gambling debts, the bank had moved to foreclose. I had stepped in. I did not tell them. I used a shell company, a faceless corporate entity, to purchase the debt technically, legally, and financially. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the bed Drew was sleeping in. I owned the very floor Linda was kneeling on to pray. They did not know. They thought they had outsmarted the bank. They thought they were lucky. I was not returning as a daughter. I was not returning as a sister. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap. I was returning as the landlord, and it was time to inspect my property. The drive from the Philadelphia International Airport to my parents' house took exactly 45 minutes, but it felt like I was traveling backward in time. I had rented a black Mercedes S-Class for the weekend. It was an unnecessary extravagance, perhaps, but I needed the armor. I needed the heavy thud of the door closing to remind me that I was no longer the girl who used to beg for lunch money. I was a woman who could buy this entire town if I felt the inclination. As I turned off the highway and navigated the winding suburban streets of Ridley Creek, the scenery shifted from the generic, manicured corporate parks to the worn-out, gray aesthetic of the lower middle class. This was a neighborhood of people who worked hard but never quite got ahead, where boats sat rusting in driveways and Christmas lights stayed up until March. I pulled up to the house at 412 Maple Street and killed the engine. The silence inside the car was hermetic, a stark contrast to the visual assault waiting for me outside. The house was a split-level ranch that had been white when I left 5 years ago. Now, it was a dingy shade of beige, the vinyl siding peeling away near the gutters like dead skin. The lawn was a disaster. The grass was knee-high, choked with dandelions and crabgrass. My eyes narrowed. I knew for a fact that the homeowners association in this development was militant about lawn care. If the grass was this long, it meant my parents were ignoring fines. It meant liens were likely piling up against the property title. My property title. I stepped out of the car, my heels sinking slightly into the soft, unkempt earth. The air smelled different here, heavier, laced with the scent of damp wood and distant charcoal grills. I smoothed down my blazer, took a deep breath of the filtered New York air I had brought with me in my lungs, and walked up the cracked concrete path. There was a package on the porch. Amazon Prime, soaking up moisture from the humid air. I glanced at the label. It was addressed to Drew. It felt heavy when I nudged it with the toe of my Italian leather shoe. A gaming console, perhaps, or maybe new parts for one of his endless hobbies that never turned into a career. Dying men usually did not order electronics with 2-day shipping. I did not knock. I rang the doorbell, a deliberate act of a guest rather than a family member. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, the smell hit me first. It was a cloying mixture of potpourri, old frying oil, and the underlying, distinct musk of a house that is never properly aired out. Zou je ting hou, Ling. 2 hekje is groter dan Hazel. My mother stood there. Linda looked older than her 58 years. Her hair was dyed a harsh, brassy blonde that clashed with her pale complexion. She was wearing a floral blouse that I recognized from a decade ago, paired with sweatpants. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they sharpened instantly when they landed on my handbag. It was a Birkin, a subtle signal of wealth that most people would miss. But Linda had spent her life studying the rich in magazines. She knew exactly what it was worth. She threw her arms around me before I could step back. The hug was suffocating. She smelled of vanilla perfume and desperation. Oh, my baby is home. She wept into my shoulder. The Lord is so good. He brought you back to us. I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides, enduring the embrace like one endures a sudden downpour. Hello, Mother, I said, my voice dry. She pulled back, gripping my shoulders. Her nails dug into the fabric of my jacket. You look, Zou ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than expensive. I work hard. I replied simply, can I come in? Or are we going to conduct the family reunion on the porch? She ushered me inside, fluttering around me nervously. Robert, Hazel is here. Come help her with her bag. My father emerged from the kitchen. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the house itself was slowly digesting him. He wiped his hands on a dish rag, avoiding my eyes. Hello, Hazel, he mumbled. Good to see you. He did not offer to take my bag, and I did not offer it. I kept my grip on the handle tight. Where is he? I asked. In the living room, Linda whispered, her voice dropping to a revered hush. He is resting. It has been a hard week. The toxins. Zou ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than they make him so tired. I walked past them, my heels clicking loudly on the cheap laminate flooring that had replaced the carpet years ago. I stepped down into the sunken living room, the heart of the house, and the throne room of the golden child. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sun. The only light came from the massive 75-inch television mounted on the wall. It was blasting a rerun of a reality show about repo men. And there he was. Drew lay sprawled on a leather recliner that looked brand new. He was wearing stained basketball shorts and a t-shirt that was 2 sizes too small. Riding up to expose his pale, hairy stomach, he did not look like a man on his deathbed. He looked like a man on vacation. True, his skin had a yellowish, waxy cast to it, the jaundice of liver or kidney issues, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but he was not emaciated. If anything, he looked heavier than the photos I had seen on Facebook years ago. His legs were swollen, retaining water, spilling over the edge of the footrest. He did not turn his head when I entered. He just kept staring at the screen, his fingers idly scratching his chest. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, Drew said, his voice thick and phlegmy. The Duchess of New York. Hello, Drew, I said, stopping in the middle of the room. I did not move closer. I kept a sterile distance, like a doctor observing a contagious patient. Mom said you were dying. We are all dying. Hazel, he scoffed, finally tearing his eyes away from the television to glare at me. Some of us just have an expiration date that is coming up faster. Linda rushed to his side, fluffing a pillow behind his head that did not need fluffing. Do not strain yourself. Honey, do you need anything? A blanket? Some ice chips? I watched the dynamic with a cold fascination. He was 36 years old. He was a grown man who had been married and divorced twice. Yet she tended to him as if he were a toddler with a scraped knee. I am thirsty, Drew grunted. I will get you some water, Linda said immediately. No, Drew snapped. I want a soda, the cherry kind. The air in the room seemed to freeze for a second. Even I, with my limited medical knowledge, knew that dark sodas were full of phosphorus, poison for failing kidneys. If he was truly in end-stage renal failure, a cherry cola was basically a loaded gun. Linda hesitated. The doctor said you should stick to water or cranberry juice. Sweetie, the phosphorus. 少于今后令, R 今后大于, one soda is not going to kill me. Ma, Drew shouted. His face turned a mottled red. God, can I have one thing? I am sitting here in pain. My back is killing me. And you are going to deny me a drink? It was a tantrum. A pure, unfiltered, childish tantrum. And it worked. It always worked. Okay. Sure. Do not get upset. It raises your blood pressure. Linda soothed him, patting his arm. I will get it. Just a little one. She hurried to the kitchen, casting a guilty look at me as she passed. I stood there, motionless. So, Drew said, looking me up and down, his eyes lingering on my jewelry. You look like you are doing well. Mark said you bought a condo in the city. I said, must be nice. Leaving us here to rot while you play dress up. I did not leave you to rot. Drew, you did that to yourself. He laughed. A wet, hacking sound. Yeah, Miss Perfect. You always thought you were better than us. But guess what? You are here now. You came back. Because you know you owe me. I owe you? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You are the spare, Hazel. He sneered, picking up the remote control. I was born first. I got the bad genes so you could have the good ones. That makes you my insurance policy. It is time to pay up. Linda returned with the soda. It was a large glass, filled to the brim with dark, fizzy liquid and ice. She handed it to him with a trembling hand. Here you go, baby. Drew snatched it from her without a thank you. He brought the straw to his lips and took a long, defiant sip, staring straight at me the entire time. I watched the bubbles rise in the glass. I watched my mother wring her hands, terrified of his anger but seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was handing him the very thing that was accelerating his condition. This was not a tragedy. This was a suicide pact, and my parents were the willing accomplices. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Mark. Did you see the car in the driveway? The Toyota is gone. I blinked. I had been so focused on the house that I had not realized my father's truck was missing. They sold it last week. Mark's text continued. Drew owed $20,000 to a bookie in South Philly. Dad cashed out his 401k plan too. I looked at my father, who was standing in the corner of the room, looking at his shoes. I looked at Drew, chugging his soda. I looked at the peeling paint and the expensive gaming console on the porch. The rage I had felt in New York transformed into something colder, sharper. It crystallized into clarity. They did not need a kidney. They needed a miracle. And they thought I was it. I smiled at Drew. It was a small, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. Enjoy your drink, Drew, I said softly. I turned and walked toward the guest room, clutching my bag. I had seen enough for the first hour. The cracks were not just in the foundation of the house. They were running through the souls of the people inside it, and I was going to be the sledgehammer that shattered them completely. The guest bedroom smelled of mothballs and stagnation. It was a scent that clung to the back of my throat, a physical reminder that nothing in this house ever moved forward. It only aged and decayed. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, staring at the faded floral wallpaper that had started to peel at the seams. Downstairs, the muffled drone of the television was constant, punctuated occasionally by my mother's anxious footsteps or Drew's hacking cough. I checked my watch. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. I needed to get out. The air in the house felt thick, as if the oxygen were being siphoned off to feed the delusion downstairs. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the room, my steps deliberate and loud enough to be heard. I am going out for coffee, I announced as I reached the bottom of the stairs. I have some emails to answer, and the Wi-Fi here is practically non-existent. Linda looked up from the kitchen table where she was sorting through a stack of unopened mail, mostly final notices. I assumed, "Oh, Hazel, cannot you stay? Drew was just saying he wanted to talk to you about the old days." I suppressed a shudder. The old days involved him holding me down while he dripped spit onto my face. "I will be back in an hour, Mother," I said, not waiting for permission. "I need caffeine if I am going to function." I did not wait for a response. I walked out the front door, the humidity of the Pennsylvania summer hitting me like a wet towel. I got into the rental car, locked the doors, and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since I crossed the state line. I drove 20 minutes to a town called Media, a slightly more upscale suburb where the coffee shops served oat milk and the clientele wore business casual instead of sweatpants. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookstore. Mark was already there. My second brother sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, nursing a black coffee. At 34, Mark was the only other anomaly in the Vance family tree. He was handsome in a manicured, clinical way, high cheekbones, perfectly styled hair, and a polo shirt that fit him impeccably. He looked like exactly what he was, a successful plastic surgeon who spent his days reconstructing vanity. But today, he looked tired. There were lines of tension around his mouth that Botox could not fix. I slid into the chair opposite him. He did not smile. He just pushed a manila envelope across the table. "Hello, Hazel," he said softly. "Mark." I nodded, keeping my sunglasses on for a moment before removing them. "You look like hell." "I feel like it," he admitted. "Did you see him?" I saw him drinking a cherry cola while Mom fluffed his pillows. It was quite the tableau. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. "Of course, the king on his throne. I gestured to the envelope. Is this it? That is everything, Mark said, lowering his voice. I had to call in a favor with a friend in nephrology at the county hospital to get the raw files. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act laws are a nightmare. But, Saoyuting Haling, 2# is greater than family is family, right? I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of medical records, thick and dense with medical jargon. I skimmed the first page, my eyes scanning for the keywords Mark had told me to look for. End-stage renal disease, hypertension, history of substance abuse. I stopped. My finger hovered over the line. Patient admits to chronic usage of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and opioid analgesics. Toxicology screening positive for ethanol. I looked up at Mark. Translate this for me. I deal in hedge funds, not kidneys. Mark leaned in, his voice a whisper. Drew does have kidney failure. That part is true, but it is not some tragic, genetic mystery like Mom is painting it. He did this to himself. Hazel, go on, I said, my blood running cold. He has been popping prescription painkillers like candy for his back pain for 5 years, Mark explained, his hands clenching around his coffee cup. High doses, combined with the alcohol. He drinks a 12-pack of beer a night. Hazel. And his untreated high blood pressure. Saoyuting Ling, 2# is greater than. He basically poisoned his own kidneys. I looked back at the paper. So, the narrative that he is just an unlucky victim, Saoyuting Ling, Jing Dayu, is a lie. Mark cut in. It is a complete fabrication. And here is the kicker. Look at the last page. The transplant eligibility assessment. I flipped to the back. There was a section titled Psychosocial Evaluation. Patient deemed high risk for transplant rejection due to non-compliance. Patient refuses to attend substance abuse counseling. Patient continues to smoke and consume alcohol against medical advice. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the smell of coffee. They know, I whispered. The doctors know. He is still drinking. Mark nodded grimly. He is not even on the active transplant list. Hazel. The hospital suspended him 3 months ago because he failed a urine test. He cannot get a kidney from the National Registry until he is 6 months sober. My mind raced, connecting the dots with the speed of a high-frequency trading algorithm. If he is not on the list, Saoyuting Ling, Jing Dayu, then you are his only option. Mark finished for me. A direct, living donor bypasses the waiting list. If you agree to give him a kidney, the hospital has to perform the surgery, regardless of his status on the registry. As long as the donor consents and knows the risks, Mom thinks that if she can guilt you into giving him a kidney, it solves everything. He gets fresh parts, and he does not have to stop drinking. I sat back, the leather of the chair creaking. It was worse than I thought. They were not just asking for a sacrifice. They were asking me to throw a healthy organ into a trash compactor. But why the urgency? I asked, tapping my fingernail on the table. Why call me now? Why the panic about him dying in weeks? Mark sihe and rubbed his temples. That brings us to the second part of the horror show. The money. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through a few images before handing it to me. It was a photo of a document, a title transfer for a vehicle. Our father's Toyota Tundra. Mark said, you noticed it was gone? They sold it. I said, they sold it for $22,000 cash last Tuesday. Mark corrected. But here is the thing. Hazel, They told me they sold it to pay for Drew's dialysis treatments because insurance was maxed out. I raised an eyebrow. Dialysis is covered by Medicare for anyone with end-stage renal failure. Regardless of age, it is one of the few things the government actually pays for fully. Exactly. Mark said. They did not spend a dime on dialysis. Then where is the money? Mark took his phone back. Drew owes money to people you do not want to know. Hazel. He has been gambling online. Sports betting. Crypto scams. You name it. He got in deep with a loan shark in South Philadelphia. The guy threatened to break his legs. I stared out the window at the peaceful street. A young mother was pushing a stroller. A couple was walking a golden retriever. It seemed like a different universe. So, the panic. Xiao Tsinghao Ling. 2 hashes greater than I started. Piecing it together. The panic is because the $22,000 from the truck only covered the interest and a bit of the principal. Mark said, the sharks want the rest. And Drew, Xiao Tsinghao Ling, 2 hash is greater than Drew, has this delusional idea that if he gets a kidney, he will suddenly be healthy enough to get a job or scam disability insurance for a lump sum payout. Or maybe they just think having a wealthy daughter back in the fold means you will pay off the debt to save the family honor. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. It was never about love. It was never even about saving his life. Really, it was about assets. It was about liquidity. I was just a walking automated teller machine that also happened to carry spare biological parts. Does Mom know? I asked. Does she know about the gambling? She knows. Mark said. She justifies it. She says Drew is just unlucky and that he is trying to support the family. She is drowning in denial. Hazel. She would set herself on fire if Drew said he was cold. But since she has nothing left to burn, she is offering you up as firewood. I looked at the documents one last time. The clinical detachment of the words non-compliance, substance abuse, toxicology positive stood in stark contrast to the emotional manipulation I had endured on the phone. Can I keep these? I asked, tapping the envelope. Mark hesitated. If they find out I gave you those, Xiao Tsinghao Ling, R. Tsinghao Dayu, they will not. I promised. I am a vault. He nodded. Keep them. Just Xiao Tsinghao Ling. 2 hash is greater than be careful. Hazel. They are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Drew is not the same brother we grew up with. The drugs have rotted more than just his kidneys. They have rotted his brain. I put the envelope in my bag, right next to my checkbook. I am not afraid of them. Mark, I said, my voice steady. I deal with sharks in suits every day. These are just goldfish in a dirty bowl. I stood up. I had the evidence. I had the motive. Now, I just needed the confession. Where are you going? Mark asked. Back to the house. I said, it is almost time for dinner, and I have a feeling the main course is going to be guilt, served with a side of extortion. Mark looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. What are you going to do? I am going to let them play their hand. I said, adjusting the strap of my bag. I want to see how far they are willing to go. I want to see if they will actually look me in the eye and lie while holding a knife to my back. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving my brother alone in the corner. The sun was shining, but the world felt darker than it had an hour ago. The drive back to the house felt different. The first time, I had felt like an intruder. Now, I felt like a spy. Every mile that passed, my heart hardened a little more. I thought about the little girl who used to cry because her brother pushed her off her bike. and her mother scolded her for bruising her knees. That little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly what everything cost, and I was about to teach my family a lesson in economics they would never forget. You cannot spend what you do not earn, and you certainly cannot withdraw from an account you have overdrawn for 30 years. I pulled into the driveway. The grass was still too long. The house still looked like a dying animal. But now, I saw the rot for what it really was. It was not poverty. It was choice. I stepped out of the car, clutching the envelope against my side like a weapon. Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than game on. The sun had begun to set by the time I returned to the house, casting long, bruised shadows across the overgrown lawn. The air inside the house had changed. The stale smell of sickness had been temporarily masked by the aroma of roasted meat and heavy gravy. It was a smell that should have been comforting, but to me, it smelled like a trap. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. The dining room table, usually covered in stacks of unpaid bills and junk mail, had been cleared. The good china, a wedding gift from 30 years ago that was now chipped and spiderwebbed with hairline fractures, was laid out. There were candles burning, their wicks sputtering in the drafty room. But it was the guest sitting at the head of the table who made my blood run cold. Pastor Jenkins was a man who took up space. He was a large individual with a face that always looked flushed, wearing a black suit that shone with age at the elbows. He was the shepherd of the local congregation my mother attended, a church that preached prosperity gospel to people who could barely afford to keep their lights on. Hazel, Linda chirped, emerging from the kitchen with a steaming platter of roast beef. Look who stopped by to pray for Drew. Is not it a blessing? Pastor Jenkins stood up, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. He extended a meaty hand toward me. Sister Hazel, it has been too long. Your mother tells us you have been lost to the city of Babylon, but the Lord always guides his lambs home. I looked at his hand, then at his face. I did not take it. Hello, Pastor, I said, keeping my hands firmly in the pockets of my blazer. I did not know this was a formal dinner party. We just wanted to have a nice meal, Robert mumbled from his seat. He looked uncomfortable, his necktie tied too tight, restricting his breathing. Sit, Linda urged, pulling out a chair next to Drew. I sat. The chair wobbled on one leg. Across from me, Drew was already eyeing the meat, his fork gripped in his fist like a weapon. He looked better than he had this afternoon, likely because he had washed down his cherry soda with whatever painkillers he had hidden in his room. His eyes were glassy, pupils pinned. Linda served the food with a frantic energy. Potatoes, green beans swimming in butter, thick slices of beef. It was a heart attack on a plate, the kind of meal that had likely contributed to the health issues plaguing this family in the first place. Before we eat, Pastor Jenkins announced, his voice booming in the small room, let us bow our heads. Linda reached out and grabbed my left hand. Her palm was damp. On my right, I was forced to take Drew's hand. It was cold and clammy, the skin feeling loose and doughy. Lord, Jenkins began, we thank you for this bounty. We thank you for bringing Hazel back to the fold. We ask that you soften her heart. Lord, we ask that you open her spirit to the spirit of giving. For as the scripture says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And how much more, Lord, for one's own brother? I kept my eyes open. I stared at the flickering candle flame. This was not a prayer. It was a sermon directed at an audience of one. Amen, Linda whispered. squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. Amen, Drew grunted. They released me, and the sound of silverware clinking against ceramic filled the silence. I cut a small piece of potato but did not eat it. I watched them. I watched Pastor Jenkins shovel food into his mouth while talking about sacrifice. I watched my mother pushing food onto Drew's plate, treating him like a fragile bird that needed fattening. So, Hazel, Jenkins said, chewing loudly, your mother tells me you have done very well for yourself. A finance director? Chief Financial Officer, I corrected. Impressive. Very impressive. The Lord blesses those who work hard, but He also expects us to be stewards of those blessings. You know, the Bible talks a lot about the rich man and the eye of a needle. I took a sip of water. I am familiar with the verse. Pastor, I am also familiar with the one about those who do not work. Neither shall they eat. The table went silent. Robert dropped his fork. Linda gasped. Hazel, do not be rude. Linda, he said, I am just quoting scripture. Mother, I said innocently. Pastor Jenkins cleared his throat, his face turning a shade darker red. The point, Sister Hazel, is that you have been given much. You have your health, you have your wealth, and here sits your brother, suffering. God does not make mistakes. Perhaps He gave you 2 healthy kidneys because He knew, in His infinite wisdom, that one day your brother would need one. I felt a phantom pain in my lower back, sharp and sudden. It was a psychosomatic echo, but it felt real. The room seemed to shrink. The walls pressed in. I was no longer 32. I was 4 years old. Flashback. The hospital room was white and blindingly bright. I was lying on a table, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had lost one ear. I was terrified. Mommy? I had whimpered. Hush. Hazel, Linda had said. She was not looking at me. She was looking through the glass window at the next room, where Drew was lying in a bed, surrounded by doctors. Be a big girl. Your brother needs your magic juice. The doctor had been a giant man with cold hands. This will hurt a little, he had said. He lied. It did not hurt a little. When the needle went into my hip bone to extract the marrow, it felt like someone had struck me with lightning. It was a deep, grinding agony that vibrated through my entire skeleton. I screamed. I screamed until my throat tore, but no one came to hold my hand. No one wiped my tears. Through the haze of pain, I saw my mother in the doorway. She was smiling, not at me. She was smiling because the bag of red marrow was being carried out of the room. He is going to be okay, she had cheered. Thank you, Jesus. I lay there, 4 years old, bleeding and broken on a cold table, realizing for the first time that I was not a person to them. I was a container. I was a spare parts bin. End flashback. I came back to the present with a jolt. My hand was gripping the steak knife so tightly my knuckles were white. It is a simple procedure. Hazel, Pastor Jenkins was saying, oblivious to the violence in my eyes. A few days in the hospital, a small scar, and you give the gift of life. What is a little pain compared to your brother's survival? A little pain, I repeated, my voice low. Linda shimmed in, her eyes wide and pleading. You are so strong. Hazel, you always have been. Remember when you gave him your bone marrow? You were so brave. You did not even cry. I stared at her. The revisionist history was breathtaking. I did not cry. I screamed for an hour. I could not walk properly for a week. I was 4. Mother, I had no choice. And now you have a choice. Drew interrupted. His voice was slurred, but the malice in it was razor sharp. He pointed his fork at me. "And you are going to make the right one. And if I do not?" I asked, turning my gaze to him. "If I decide that my body belongs to me, then you are a murderer." Linda sobbed, dropping her head into her hands. "You are killing him. How can you be so selfish? After everything we did for you, we raised you, we fed you." I looked around the table. The guilt was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from years of manipulation. They truly believed it. They believed I owed them my flesh. Drew laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "Stop begging her. Ma, she knows the deal." He leaned forward, his massive bulk pressing against the table edge. "Look at you, Hazel, sitting there in your $1,000 suit. You think you are special? You think you made it? You are nothing. You are the second draft. The backup plan? Excuse me?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "If I had not gotten sick when I was a kid," Drew sneered, showing his yellow teeth, "you would not even be here. Mom and Dad stopped at 1. They only had you because the doctors said they needed a genetic match for the cord blood in the marrow." The room went dead silent. Even Pastor Jenkins stopped chewing. I looked at my father. He was staring at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Linda. She was wiping her eyes, but she did not deny it. "See?" Drew gloated, leaning back in his chair like a king who had just delivered a decree. "I am the reason you exist. Hazel, I am your creator. So technically, every part of you belongs to me. I am just asking for a return on my investment." The silence that followed was deafening. My heart hammered against my ribs, not in fear, but in a revelation so stark it was blinding. I had always suspected it. I had always felt like an outsider in my own home, but hearing it said aloud that my entire existence was calculated, manufactured for the sole purpose of harvesting biological material, shattered the last fragile thread of attachment I had to these people. I looked at Drew. I saw the grease on his chin. I saw the entitlement rotting his soul faster than the disease was rotting his body. I slowly placed my knife and fork down on the plate. Clink, clink. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. "Is that so?" I said softly. I stood up. My legs felt steady. My mind was clear. The vulnerability I had felt earlier, the sadness of the neglected child, evaporated. In its place, something cold and hard settled in. "If I am an investment, Drew," I said, looking down at him, "then you should know something about finance. Bad investments get liquidated." I did not wait for them to process the words. I turned and walked out of the dining room. "Hazel, come back here," Linda shrieked. "We are not finished." I walked up the stairs to the guest room. I did not slam the door. I closed it gently. I clicked the lock. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. My hands were not shaking. I felt a strange, terrifying calm. They had shown their hand. They had revealed the monster in the basement. They thought they had broken me with the truth, but they had made a fatal error. They had just given me permission to stop being human. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope Mark had given me. I also pulled out my phone. It was time to make a call. Not to a doctor, not to a therapist. I dialed the number for the foreclosure department of my holding company. It was time to collect. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:14 in the morning. The red numbers stared back at me in the darkness. Unblinking eyes in a room that felt suffocatingly small. I was awake, lying rigid under the thin, scratchy sheets, listening to the house settle. Old houses make noise. They groan as the temperature drops, the wood contracting like arthritic bones. but the sound I heard was not the house. It was the distinct, heavy creak of a floorboard in the hallway, followed by the soft click of the door handle turning. I did not move. I kept my breathing shallow and even, feigning sleep. My hand, however, slid silently under the pillow, wrapping around the cold metal of my phone. The door pushed open. A sliver of hallway light cut across the carpet, illuminating a silhouette that blocked out nearly the entire frame. It was Drew. He did not call my name. He did not check to see if I was awake. He moved with a surprising stealth for a man of his size, creeping toward the chair in the corner where I had left my handbag. I watched through cracked eyelids. He was rifling through my purse. I heard the soft zip of the inner pocket, the rustle of leather. He was looking for cash. It was pathetic. It was the desperate, fumbling act of an addict. I sat up and clicked on the bedside lamp. The sudden light flooded the room. Drew froze, his hand still deep inside my bag. He blinked rapidly, his pupils pinpricks in the brightness, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. "Do you need a loan?" "Drew?" I asked, my voice calm, devoid of the fear he likely expected. He snatched his hand back, knocking the bag to the floor. Contents spilled out. My lipstick, a Mont Blanc pen, a pack of mints, but no cash. I never carried cash. Xiao Yu Jing Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than I was looking for an aspirin. He stammered, his face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. My head is splitting. "In my purse?" I asked, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "You thought I kept aspirin next to my wallet?" He straightened up, abandoning the pretense. His demeanor shifted instantly from caught thief to aggressive bully. The mask of the dying victim slipped completely. "Do not look at me like that. Hazel, you think you are so high and mighty with your designer bags. You have no idea what real pressure is. Try me," I said. He took a step toward the bed. The smell coming off him was a mixture of stale sweat and fear. "I owe people, Hazel, bad people, not the bank, not the credit card company. I am talking about guys who use baseball bats for debt collection. The loan shark in South Philly," I said flatly. He stopped, surprised. "How do you?" "Xiao Yu Jing Hao Ling. To Mark, that rat. It does not matter how I know." I said, "How much?" $50,000. He spat out. "Plus interest. They said if I do not pay by the end of the month, they are going to come here. They are going to torch the house." "Hazel," with Mom and Dad inside. I looked at him, analyzing the threat. It was likely an exaggeration, a narrative spun to induce maximum panic. But the fear in his eyes was real. "So that is the plan?" I asked. "You get my kidney, you get healthy, and then what? You magically pay them back?" "No, you idiot," he hissed. "I need the surgery to show them I am recovering. If I have a transplant scheduled, I can borrow against the disability settlement I am applying for. Or, Xiao Yu Jing Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than maybe my rich sister pays them off to keep her family from being incinerated." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "You are going to give me that kidney, Hazel, and you are going to write a check, because if you do not, whatever happens to this family is on your hands. You will be the one who let us burn." He turned and lumbered out of the room, leaving the door wide open. I sat there for a long time, listening to his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. My heart was pounding, not from the threat, but from the sheer audacity. He was not asking for a favor. He was demanding a ransom. Inner monologue. Most people would leave. They would pack their bags, drive to the airport, and block the number. But I am not most people. I am a creature of the market. When someone tries to corner the market on my life, I do not fold. I acquire a controlling interest. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, the atmosphere in the kitchen was brittle. Linda was frying bacon, humming a hymn, pretending the blowout at dinner had never happened. Drew was absent, likely sleeping off the adrenaline of his midnight raid. I walked in, dressed in fresh clothes, of my face a mask of compliance. "Good morning, Mother," I said. "Hazel," she chirped, turning around. "Do you want some eggs?" I sat at the table. "I have been thinking about what Pastor Jenkins said." Linda froze, the spatula hovering over the skillet. And, Sawi Ting Halin, 2 hash is greater than maybe you are right. I lead. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. If I can help Drew, Sawi Ting Haling, 2, if I am a match, Sawi Ting Haling, 2 hash is greater than maybe it is my duty. Linda dropped the spatula. It clattered onto the stove. She rushed over and hugged me, smelling of grease and victory. "Oh, praise God. I knew it. I knew you would come around. Oh, Hazel, you are saving us. You are an angel." I pulled away gently. "But I need to see the paperwork. Mom, I need to see the insurance forms for the surgery. I need to make sure everything is covered so I do not get hit with a surprise bill." "Of course, anything," Linda cried. "They are in Dad's office, in the filing cabinet, top drawer. Go look. I will make you a special breakfast." I walked into the small room my father called an office. It was a chaotic mess of papers. I opened the top drawer. It was stuffed with medical bills, final notices, and foreclosure warnings from the bank. Warnings I already knew about because I was the one sending them. I dug deeper. I needed to find the health insurance policy to see who the primary carrier was. My hand brushed against a thick, blue folder at the back of the drawer. It looked newer than the rest. The label on the tab read, Prudential, Hazel. I frowned. I did not have a policy with Prudential. I pulled the folder out and opened it. It was a term life insurance policy. The face value was $2 million. Insured, Hazel Vance. Beneficiaries, Linda Vance. Mother, Drew Vance. Brother. Effective date, 3 weeks ago. My breath hitched. I flipped to the last page. There, at the bottom, was my signature, Hazel Vance, but it was not my signature. The H was looped too wide. The V was too sharp. It was a clumsy forgery, likely done by my mother, who had always prided herself on being able to sign my report cards in high school. I stared at the document, the world tilting on its axis. They had taken out a life insurance policy on me 3 weeks before, calling me to tell me Drew was dying. Inner monologue. They do not just want my kidney. They are hedging their bets. If I survive the surgery, they get an organ and demand financial support. If I die on the table, due to a tragic complication or an adverse reaction to anesthesia, they get $2 million. In fact, $2 million is worth a lot more to them than a kidney. A cold chill, sharper than any winter wind, swept through my body. This was not just entitlement. This was not just narcissism. This was premeditation. They were gambling on my life. They had placed a wager on my mortality. I heard Linda humming in the kitchen. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Sao yu ting hao ling. R. Ting hao da yu. The sound was grotesque. I took my phone out and snapped high-resolution photos of every page of the policy. Then, I carefully placed the folder back exactly where I found it. I stood up. My hands were steady. My heartbeat slowed down to a rhythmic, predatory thud. For years, I had told myself they were just damaged people. I told myself they loved me in their own broken way. I was wrong. They were not family. They were parasites. And a parasite does not stop feeding until the host is dead. I walked back into the kitchen. Linda placed a plate of eggs in front of me. Beaming, "Did you find what you needed, honey?" she asked. "Yes, Mother," I said, picking up my fork. I found exactly what I needed. I ate the eggs. I chewed slowly, swallowing the nausea, swallowing the rage, fueling my body for the war that was about to begin. I was going to give them their show. I was going to take the tests. I was going to let them think they had won. I would walk them right up to the edge of the cliff they believed was their salvation. And then I was going to push. 3 days later, the results were in. We were gathered in the living room again. A perverse reenactment of the welcome party, but this time the air crackled with a different kind of electricity. Linda had insisted we open the official envelope from the transplant center together. She sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and the paper in my lap. "Well," she breathed. "Open it, Hazel." I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope. The paper tore with a sharp, distinct sound. I pulled out the letter. "Dear Ms. Vance, based on the preliminary human leukocyte antigen tissue typing and blood cross-matching, Xiaoyu Jinghao Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu." I scanned the medical jargon, feigning suspense, though I had already bribed a lab technician over the phone to tell me the results hours ago. "I am a match," I said, keeping my voice flat. Linda let out a shriek that was half laugh, half sob. She threw her hands up to the ceiling. "Thank you. Jesus, thank you. I knew it. I knew you would not forsake us." Drew, who was sprawled on his recliner eating a bag of chips, smirked. "Told you, we are practically twins." It was destiny. Robert clapped his hands together. A rare display of emotion. "That is great news. Just great. When can we schedule the surgery?" The speed with which they pivoted from relief to logistics was nauseating. There was no thank you. Hazel. There was no "are you scared?" Hazel? There was only the greedy anticipation of the harvest. I placed the letter on the coffee table. "The doctors want to do a final psychological evaluation next week." I lied smoothly. "And then we can schedule the date." "Perfect," Linda said, already reaching for her phone. "I need to call Pastor Jenkins. We need to organize a prayer circle for the surgery." "Wait," I said, raising a hand. "Before we schedule anything, we need to talk about the details." "Details?" Drew scoffed. "What details?" "You go in, they cut you open, they take the kidney, you wake up, boom, done. The aftercare." I said, "And Xiaoyu Jinghao Ling, 2# is greater than the costs." Linda's face tightened. "Oh, honey, do not worry about money. The insurance covers the surgery. I am talking about my lost wages." I said, "I will be out of work for 6 weeks, and Drew will need anti-rejection medicines for the rest of his life. Those are expensive." Linda and Robert exchanged a quick, nervous glance. Then, Robert reached under the coffee table and pulled out a stapled document. "Actually, Hazel, we thought about that," Robert said, clearing his throat. "Since you are going to be helping your brother, Saoyuting Haoling. 2# is greater than we thought. It would be best if we formalized things, just to make sure Drew is taken care of long term. He slid the document toward me. It was a contract, a homemade, pitifully drafted legal agreement. Family support agreement. I picked it up and read, whereas Hazel Vance agrees to donate 1 kidney to Drew Vance. Saoyuting Hao Ling. R. Jinghao Dayu. Hazel Vance also agrees to establish a trust fund in the amount of $50,000 for Drew Vance's post-operative recovery and living expenses. Hazel Vance agrees to cover all future medical premiums for Drew Vance. I looked up, staring at them in disbelief. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. You want me to give you an organ, I said slowly. And you also want me to pay you $50,000? It is for his recovery, Linda interjected quickly, her voice high and defensive. He cannot work while he is healing. He needs good food, a clean environment. Saoyuting Haoling. 2# is greater than, and you make so much money. Hazel, 50,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. It is extortion. I said, it is family, Drew shouted, slamming his fist onto the armrest. You owe me. I am the sick one. You are the one with the fancy job and the penthouse. You think you are better than us? Prove it. Put your money where your mouth is. I looked at the document again. It was typed in Comic Sans font. It was ridiculous. It would not hold up in any court in America. But it was a window into their souls. They did not just want to survive. They wanted to profit. They saw my body as a commodity and my bank account as a rightful inheritance they were entitled to plunder while still alive. I will think about it, I said, folding the paper and putting it in my pocket. You will sign it, Drew threatened. Or maybe I tell the doctors you are being coerced. Maybe I tell them you are unstable, then no surgery. And then when I die, everyone knows it was because you were too cheap to save me. I looked at him. The threat was empty. If he told the doctors I was coerced, he would not get the kidney anyway. He was too stupid to realize he was checkmating himself. I stood up. I need some air. I walked out of the house, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, focused adrenaline. I got into my car and drove. I did not go to the coffee shop this time. I drove to the county courthouse in the next town over. I spent the next 2 hours in the records department, pulling every lien, every judgment, every financial stain on the Vance family name. It was worse than Mark had said. There was a second mortgage taken out 5 years ago. There were 3 credit card judgments against my father. There was a lien from the Internal Revenue Service for unpaid taxes from 2018. And, most damning of all, there was a police report from 6 months ago. Drew Vance, arrested for disorderly conduct and attempted fraud at a casino in Atlantic City. They were drowning, and they were trying to use me as a life raft. Not to float, but to burn for warmth. I sat on a bench outside the courthouse. The documents spread out on my lap. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. People were walking their dogs. It was a beautiful day, and I felt absolutely nothing for the people who raised me. The last vestiges of guilt, the tiny voice that said, "But they are your parents," had been silenced by the contract typed in Comic Sans. My phone buzzed. It was my lawyer in New York. James. Hazel. James said, his voice crisp and professional. I got your message. We have prepared the foreclosure notice. Are you sure you want to proceed? This is Saoyuting Haoling. 2# is greater than aggressive. Do it. I said, It will be served by the sheriff within 48 hours. James warned. They will be given 30 days to vacate. It is going to be ugly. I want it served tomorrow. I said, tomorrow evening. Why tomorrow? Because tomorrow is the night before the surgery is scheduled. I said, we are having a family dinner. I want it to be memorable. James paused. You are a cold woman. Hazel, I learned from the best. James, I learned from the best. Saoyuting Haling. 2. I hung up. I drove back to the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. When I walked inside, Linda was in the kitchen, humming again. Did you have a nice drive? She asked. Lovely. I said. I looked at Drew. He was asleep in the chair, his mouth open, drool pooling on his collar. I looked at the walls. My walls. I looked at the floor. My floor. The tragedy was not that they were losing their home. The tragedy was that they never really had a home. They had a hostage situation disguised as a family, and the hostages were about to be released. Whether they liked it or not, I went upstairs and began to pack my bag. Not to leave. Not yet. I packed because I wanted to be ready. When the bomb went off, I did not want to be scrambling for my toothbrush. I sat on the edge of the bed and took out the forged insurance policy photo on my phone. I looked at my fake signature, Hazel Vance. I zoomed in on the loop of the L. It was shaky. My mother's hand had trembled when she signed my death warrant. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was Parkinson's. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the last shred of her conscience dying as the ink hit the paper. It did not matter now. The script was written. The stage was set. Tomorrow, the curtain would fall. The air in the dining room was heavy enough to choke on. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, the night before my scheduled admission to the hospital. My mother had prepared a celebratory feast, a grotesque parody of the Last Supper featuring meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a store-bought cake that read New Beginnings in bright blue icing. I sat at the head of the table. It was not my usual seat. That belonged to my father, but I had taken it before he arrived, and he had been too cowardly to ask me to move. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, silk blouse, and my hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun. I was not dressed for dinner. I was dressed for a hostile takeover. Linda was vibrating with nervous energy. She kept refilling my water glass, smiling a smile that did not touch her eyes. Eat up, Hazel, she urged. You need your strength for tomorrow. It is a big day. I looked at the meatloaf. It was swimming in grease. I am not hungry. Mother, I said calmly. Drew was already on his second slice. He was manic, talking with his mouth full about the plans he had for after. I was thinking, he said, spraying crumbs onto the tablecloth. Once I am back on my feet, maybe I will start a business. Cryptocurrency mining. I read about it online. You just buy the computers and let them run. Easy money. I watched him. The delusion was fascinating. He barely had the discipline to brush his teeth, yet he thought he could run a tech startup. We need to talk, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through his rambling like a scalpel. Drew stopped chewing. Linda froze with the water pitcher in midair. Robert looked down at his plate, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. Talk about what? Drew asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. We signed the papers. The surgery is tomorrow at 6 in the morning. There will be no surgery, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Linda laughed nervously. Stop joking. Hazel, you have a terrible sense of humor. The doctor is expecting us. I am not joking. I am not donating my kidney. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Drew's face turned a mottled shade of purple. What did you say? I reached under the table and pulled out the manila envelope Mark had given me, along with the photos I had printed from my phone. I tossed the stack onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, final thud, right next to the New Beginnings cake. I know, Drew, I said. Know what? He snarled, though his eyes darted to the envelope with a flicker of recognition. I reached out and flipped over the top document. It was the toxicology report from the county hospital. I know that your kidneys are not failing because of bad luck. They are failing because you have been swallowing painkillers and washing them down with whiskey for 5 years. I know you are not on the transplant list. I know the doctors banned you because you cannot pass a drug test. Linda gasped. That is a lie. That is a lie from the devil. Who told you that? It is in black and white. Mother, I said, pointing to the paper. But that is not all. I flipped the next page. It was the printout of his gambling debts. Obtained through a private investigator I had hired 24 hours ago to confirm Mark's intel. $55,000 owed to an illegal bookmaker in South Philadelphia. I recited, You sold Dad's truck to pay the interest, but the principal is still due. You did not want my kidney to live. Drew, you wanted the surgery so you could qualify for a compassionate loan shark extension or a disability payout. You were going to sell parts of me to pay for your blackjack habit. Drew stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Shut up. You do not know what you are talking about. Sit down. Drew, I commanded. I did not raise my voice, but the authority in it was absolute. I was no longer his little sister. I was the chief financial officer, and he was a junior employee caught embezzling. He hesitated, then sank back into his chair, breathing heavily. Linda was weeping now, the performative tears flowing freely. Hazel, please. He has a sickness. Addiction is a disease. We have to help him. We are family. Family, I repeated, testing the word. It tasted like bile. Is that what we are? I reached into the stack and pulled out the final piece of evidence. The photos of the Prudential life insurance policy. I slid the glossy photo across the table toward my mother, then explained this. Linda. She looked down. Her weeping stopped instantly. Her face went pale, draining of all color until she looked like a wax figure. What is that? Robert asked, squinting. It is a $2 million life insurance policy on my life, I explained, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. Taken out 3 weeks ago, with a forged signature. Robert looked at his wife. Linda, you said, Sao Yu Tsing Ho Ling. 2# is greater than you said. That was just standard paperwork for the hospital. She lied to you too. Dad? I said. Or maybe you just did not want to ask questions. Linda looked up, her eyes wild and cornered. It was for your protection, in case something happened during the surgery. We just wanted to be safe. For my protection? I asked, a cold smile touching my lips. You are the beneficiary. Mother, if I die on the table, you do not just get a kidney, you get $2 million. That is quite a lottery ticket, is not it? I did not mean it like that, she screamed. You forged my signature. I said, that is a felony. That is insurance fraud. And judging by the timing, you were betting against the house. You were hoping for a complication. Maybe you were even going to help one along. Did you plan to tamper with my pain meds after the surgery? Or just let me bleed out? You ungrateful bitch. The scream came from Drew. He launched himself across the table. His hands were reaching for my throat. His face twisted into a mask of pure, homicidal rage, but he never reached me. The front door, which I had unlocked 10 minutes ago, burst open. Mark stepped into the dining room, but he was not alone. Behind him were 2 uniformed officers from the Ridley Creek Sheriff's Department. "Sit down," the first officer shouted, his hand resting on his holster. Drew froze, halfway across the table, his knee deep in the mashed potatoes. He looked at the cops, then back at me. The fight drained out of him instantly, replaced by the cowardly tremble I remembered from our childhood. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. Mark walked over and stood next to me. He looked at our parents with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You people are sick," Mark said quietly. Linda stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, her voice shifting into her frantic, innocent persona. "Officers, thank goodness you are here. My daughter, Sao Tsing Ho Ling, 2# is greater than she is having a breakdown. She is saying terrible things. I think she is on drugs." The officers did not look at me. They looked at Robert. "Are you Robert Vance?" the older officer asked. "Yes," Robert stammered. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Andrew Vance for fraud and solicitation of illegal gambling," the officer said. "And Sao Tsing Ho Ling, 2# is greater than we have a notice to serve to you." "Mr. Vance," Drew let out a whimper as the second officer moved around the table, pulled his arms behind his back, and clicked the handcuffs into place. "Wait," Linda shrieked. "You cannot take him. He is sick. He needs a kidney. He needs a lawyer." "Ma'am," the officer said, while Drew was being hauled up, spitting and cursing. The older officer handed a thick envelope to my father. "This is for you." Robert took it with shaking hands. He opened it. He pulled out a document with a bright red stamp on the front. "Notice of foreclosure and eviction." "What is this?" Robert whispered. "This, Sao Tsing Ho Ling, 2# is greater than this, says we have to leave." "But I thought, Sao Tsing Ho Ling, 2# is greater than the bank said." "Sao Tsing Ho Ling, R Tsing Ho Dayu." Linda snatched the paper from him. "This is a mistake. We have an arrangement. We have been paying. Sao Tsing Ho Ling, 2# is greater than well. We missed a few payments, but we have lived here for 30 years. You cannot just kick us out." The officer looked at me. "I think Miss Vance can explain the rest." The officers dragged Drew out the front door. His screams echoed down the driveway. "Hazel, you did this. I will kill you." Then the door closed, leaving me alone with my parents and Mark. Linda turned on me, her eyes bulging. "What did you do? Did you call the bank? Did you tell them to do this?" I stood up slowly. I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of her. I towered over her in my heels. "I did not call the bank." "Mother, then who?" "I am the bank," I whispered. She blinked, confusion warring with fear. "What?" "Keystone Holdings, Limited Liability Company." I said, "The company that bought your bad debt 2 years ago? The company you have been ignoring letters from. That is me. I own the mortgage. I own the title. I own this house." Linda staggered back, clutching her chest. "You? You own our house?" I nodded. "And since you are in default, and since you tried to defraud me, and since you forged a life insurance policy on my life, Sao Tsing Ho Ling, 2# is greater than I am calling in the debt." Robert sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "Oh, God. Oh, God. You have 30 days to vacate, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. The sheriff will be back to enforce it. If you damage the property, I will sue you for the cost of repairs. If you try to steal the copper wiring, I will have you arrested. Linda stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. Like a fish on a dock, the realization was sinking in. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. She was no longer the matriarch. She was a squatter. How could you? She whispered. We are your family. No, I said. You are a biological accident. Family does not eat its young. I picked up my purse. I looked at the New Beginnings cake one last time. I suggest you start packing, I said. The rental market is very competitive right now. I turned to Mark. Are you coming? Mark looked at the ruins of our childhood home. He looked at our mother, who was now sobbing on the floor, and our father, who had turned into a statue of despair. Yes, Mark said. Get me out of here. We walked to the door. Hazel, Linda screamed after me. You cannot leave us. Where will we go? What about Drew? He will die in jail. I stopped at the threshold. I did not turn around. He has a bed and 3 meals a day. Mother, that is more than he deserves. I stepped out into the cool night air. The crickets were chirping. The streetlights were humming. Behind me, the wailing began. It was a primal sound, the sound of a world ending. I walked to my car, opened the door, and slid into the leather seat. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The heavy cloak of obligation, of guilt, of the desperate need for their approval. It was gone. I had burned it on the altar of their greed. Mark got into the passenger seat. He was trembling slightly. You are terrifying, Hazel, he said. I started the engine. The Mercedes purred to life. I know, I said. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there worth seeing. I spent the night at the Four Seasons in downtown Philadelphia, a 30-minute drive from the wreckage I had left behind in Ridley Creek. The sheets were Egyptian cotton. The room service was impeccable, and the silence was absolute. I slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep that usually only comes to the innocent or the completely heartless. I was starting to suspect I fell into the latter category. When I woke up, the sun was high over the city. I ordered coffee and opened my laptop. I did not need to be physically present in the suburbs to watch the fallout. In the digital age, destruction is a spectator sport that can be enjoyed from anywhere with a Wi-Fi connection. I logged into Facebook. I had created a burner account years ago solely to monitor my mother's public activity. Linda lived for social media. It was her stage, her pulpit, and her weapon. As I expected, she had been busy. At 3 a.m, she had posted a long, rambling status update. Please pray for our family. The devil is testing us. My son Andrew has been wrongfully accused by the police, and my own daughter has turned against us. She has been corrupted by greed and the city. She is trying to throw her sick brother and her elderly parents out on the street. We are victims of elder abuse. God sees all. Beneath the post, there were dozens of comments from her church friends and neighbors. Oh no, Linda, that is horrible. How can a daughter be so cruel? We will bring a casserole over. Stay strong. I sipped my coffee. She was playing the victim card with the skill of a maestro. She was trying to turn the narrative, painting me as the villainous, wealthy daughter, evicting her saintly, suffering parents. It was a good attempt, but she had forgotten one crucial detail. I had receipts. I picked up my phone and called Mark. Are you awake? I asked. I have not slept, Mark replied. His voice sounded rough. I am at my apartment. My phone is blowing up. Mom has called me 40 times. Aunt Sarah called me to ask if you had a psychotic break. What did you tell them? I told them to check their email, Mark said grimly. Sao Yu Tsing Holing. 2 hash is greater than good. We had agreed on the strategy last night. Linda cared about her reputation more than she cared about her children. She valued the admiration of her peers more than food or shelter. To truly defeat her, I did not just need to take her house. I needed to take her audience. I had instructed Mark to send the audio recording of the dinner, specifically the part where Drew admitted to the gambling debts and Linda admitted to the insurance forgery. To the key influencers in their social circle. Did you send it to Pastor Jenkins? I asked. Yes, Mark said. And to the head of the homeowners association. And to the ladies in her prayer circle. Sao Yu Tsing Haling. 2 hash is greater than and Sao Yu Tsing Haling. 2 hash is greater than it is ugly. Hazel. The backlash is instantaneous. I hung up and refreshed the Facebook page. The tone of the comments had shifted dramatically. Linda, is it true about the gambling? I just heard the recording. You forged an insurance policy? My husband says Drew was arrested for fraud. Not a mistake. We cannot support criminal activity. Then, a comment from the official account of the Ridley Creek Community Church appeared. Mrs. Vance, in light of the recent revelations regarding illegal gambling and fraud, we must ask you to step down from your position as treasurer of the bake sale committee. We cannot have this kind of scandal associated with the ministry. I watched as the post was deleted. Then, Linda's profile picture disappeared. She had gone dark. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. In a small town, the only thing worse than being poor is being exposed as a liar. I closed the laptop and dressed. I had one last stop to make before I returned to New York. I drove back to Ridley Creek. The neighborhood felt different today. The curtains in the houses next to my parents' home were twitching. People were watching. The police cruiser was gone, but a news van was parked down the block. Apparently, the arrest of a man for running an illegal gambling ring out of a suburban basement was slow newsday material. I pulled into the driveway. I did not get out. I just rolled down the window. The front door of the house opened. Linda stepped out. She looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her hair was unkempt. Her clothes wrinkled. She saw my car and froze. She did not scream. She did not run at me. She just stood there, slumped against the door frame, looking at the for sale sign that the realtor I had hired was currently hammering into the lawn. The realtor, a sharp woman named Karen, who did not ask questions as long as the commission was good, looked at Linda, then at me. Miss Vance, Karen said, nodding to me. I will have the listing up by this afternoon. Price to move. Thank you. Karen, I said. Linda walked slowly down the driveway. She stopped at my window. Her eyes were dull. The fire finally extinguished. Everyone knows, she whispered. Pastor Jenkins called. He said we are not welcome at Sunday service until we repent. Repentance is good for the soul. Mother, I said. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. Why did you have to humiliate us? You could have just said no. You could have just left. Why did you have to destroy everything? Because you tried to sell me for parts? I said coldly. You tried to profit from my death. You do not get to do that and keep your standing in the community. You do not get to be the victim anymore. She looked at the house. My house. Where will we go? She asked. We have no money. The truck is gone. Drew is in jail. I reached into my purse and pulled out a pamphlet I had picked up at the hotel concierge. It was not for a hotel. It was for a state-funded senior living facility 3 counties over. It was grim, underfunded, and smelled of bleach and despair, but it was free for those with no assets. I hear they have a vacancy, I said, handing it to her through the window. It is not the Ritz, but it has a roof. She took it with trembling fingers. I hate you, she whispered. I know, I said, but unlike you, I never pretended to love you while holding a knife behind my back. I rolled up the window. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw the neighbors standing on their porches. They were not looking at me with judgment. They were looking at Linda with cold, hard scrutiny. They knew the truth now. The mask had fallen off, and the monster underneath was ugly, pathetic, and broke. I drove past the church on my way out of town. I saw the marquee out front. It usually had a welcoming message. Today, it read, "The truth shall set you free." I smiled. It was the most honest thing that church had ever displayed. The social fallout was complete. They were pariahs. They would leave this town not with a bang, but with a whimper, dragging their shame behind them like a heavy chain. I turned onto the highway, the skyline of Philadelphia fading in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. Mortgage payment received. $0.00. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The debt was settled, not in cash, but in justice. The silence of my New York penthouse was different from the silence in Pennsylvania. It was sterile, expensive, and completely under my control. I stood on the balcony, 45 stories above the chaos of the city, holding a glass of mineral water. It had been 1 week since I drove away from 412 Maple Street. 1 week since I orphaned myself. The legal machinery was grinding on, indifferent and efficient. The foreclosure was proceeding without a hitch. My parents had vacated the property 3 days ago, leaving behind 30 years of accumulated junk and bad memories. My property manager sent me photos of the interior after they left. It was a wasteland. There were holes in the drywall where pictures had been ripped down. The carpet in Drew's room was stained with substances I did not want to identify. They had even taken the light bulbs. It was petty. It was predictable. I scrolled through the emails on my phone. From Mark, Dad called. They are in the shelter in Allentown. It is rough. Hazel. They are sleeping on cots in a gymnasium. Mom is crying all the time. She says the food is inedible. I felt a twinge in my chest, a phantom pain, like an amputated limb that still itches. It was the residual programming of a daughter raised to be a caretaker. Fix it. The voice whispered, write a check, put them in a motel. It would cost you nothing. But then I remembered the life insurance policy. I remembered the Comic Sans contract demanding $50,000 for the privilege of saving my brother's life. I deleted the email without replying. Another email, this one from the public defender assigned to Drew's case. Miss Vance, your brother is facing felony fraud charges and multiple counts of illegal gambling. The prosecutor is offering a plea deal, 2 years in state prison, followed by probation. He is asking if you would be willing to testify as a character witness during the sentencing phase to argue for leniency. I typed my reply with steady fingers. To whom it may concern, I will not be testifying for the defense. However, if the prosecution needs a witness to establish a pattern of behavior regarding the financial fraud, I am available. I hit send. It was ruthless. It was cold, but it was necessary. Drew needed prison, not just for punishment, but for survival. In prison, he would have no access to alcohol. He would have structured meals. He would have mandatory medical care for his kidneys. Ironically, sending him to jail was the only way to save his life. Even if he would hate me for it until his dying day, I put the phone down and walked back into the living room. It was vast and empty. The modern art on the walls looked back at me with abstract indifference. I had won. I had defeated the monsters. I had protected my assets and my body. So why did I feel so hollow? This was the part of the revenge story they never tell you about. The adrenaline fades. The righteous anger burns out. And what is left is just Soyutsingholing. 2 hashes greater than quiet. I sat on my white Italian leather sofa and looked at my hands. They were shaking slightly. I realized then that for 32 years, my entire identity had been defined in opposition to them. I was the smart one because they were ignorant. I was the rich one because they were poor. I was the responsible one because they were chaotic. I had built my entire self-worth on the foundation of not being them. Now, they were gone. They were no longer a threat. They were just sad, broken people living in a shelter, and without the constant friction of their dysfunction pushing against me. I felt untethered. Who was Hazel Vance if she was not the survivor of the Vance family? I walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at my reflection, the sharp suit, the perfect hair, the cold eyes. I saw my mother's jawline. I saw my father's brow. You cannot cut it all out. I whispered to the glass. I went to the kitchen and poured the expensive wine down the sink. I did not want it. I wanted something real. I thought about Mark. He was the only collateral damage in this war that I regretted. He was caught in the middle, trying to be the dutiful son while knowing the truth. He was suffering because he still had a heart that worked properly. Mine had calcified long ago. I picked up my phone again and dialed his number. Hazel? He answered on the first ring. I transferred $100,000 to your account. I said, silence. Then, a sigh. Hazel, I do not want your money. It is not for you. I said, it is for them. But you control it. Do not give them cash. Pay for a small apartment. Pay for groceries. Pay for Dad's blood pressure medicines. But do not let them touch a single cent. And do not tell them it came from me. Why? Mark asked softly. After everything? Because I am not them. Mark, I said, my voice breaking for the first time in a week. Because if I leave them to rot completely, then I become exactly what they are. Cruel, entitled, heartless. I am doing this for me, to prove that I am better. Mark was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said finally, I will handle it. Thank you. Soyutsingholing. 2 hekjes groter dan Hazel? Soyutsingholing. Ketu? Yes? You are a good person. You just had to be a soldier for a long time. Maybe now you can retire. I hung up. I sat on the floor of my beautiful, empty apartment and wept. I did not cry for my parents. I did not cry for Drew. I cried for the 4-year-old girl who had been held down on a table and drilled into... I cried for the teenager who hid in the library. I cried for the woman who had to become a monster to defeat the monsters. The tears were hot and cleansing. They washed away the armor. I was alone. But for the first time in my life, I was safe, and that would have to be enough. 6 months later, the first snow of the season began to fall on New York City. From my office window, the flakes looked like confetti, celebrating the silence of the city below. I was no longer just the chief financial officer. Last week, The board of directors had voted unanimously to promote me to managing partner. They cited my ruthless efficiency and unwavering focus during a recent hostile takeover. They had no idea that my training ground had not been Wharton Business School, but a split-level ranch in Pennsylvania. I sat at my desk, running my thumb over the edge of a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was an invitation to a charity gala tonight, the Freedom Foundation, supporting victims of familial exploitation. I was the guest of honor. I was also the primary donor. The money I had made from selling the house at 412 Maple Street, after paying off the liens and the closing costs, came to exactly $42,000. I matched it with my own funds and donated every cent to create a legal aid program for children trying to emancipate themselves from toxic parents. I checked the time, 5 o'clock. I packed my bag. As I walked out of the office, my assistant, a bright young woman named Sarah, looked up. "You have a call on line 2. Miss Vance," she said hesitantly. "It is a collect call from a correctional facility." I stopped. My hand tightened on the strap of my bag. "Saoy Jing Haoling. Dwa, Drew." He had pleaded guilty. He was currently serving his sentence at a medium security prison upstate. Mark told me he had lost 50 pounds. His kidneys were stable, thanks to the enforced sobriety and the prison diet. He was alive. He was healthier than he had been in a decade. "Do you want to take it?" Sarah asked. I looked at the blinking red light. I imagined him on the other end, holding the receiver in a common room, surrounded by gray walls. Was he calling to scream at me, to beg? Or had he finally realized that the cage he was in was the only thing keeping him from the grave? "No," I said. "Tell the operator I do not accept collect calls." Sarah nodded, not asking questions. I walked to the elevator. I knew where my parents were. Mark had rented them a small, one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. It was clean. It was warm. It was nothing like the house they had lost, but it was better than the shelter. Mark visited them once a month. I never did. They knew the money came from me. Mark had not been able to keep the secret. Linda had sent me a letter last month. It was 4 pages of scripture and guilt, ending with a request for a new winter coat. I burned it. I walked out of the building and into the cold, crisp air. My driver opened the door of the car. "To the Pierre Hotel, please," I said. As the car moved through the traffic, I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back was different from the one who had driven to Pennsylvania 6 months ago. The sharpness around the eyes had softened. The tension in the jaw was gone. I was not happy in the way fairy tales describe happiness. I did not have a prince. I did not have a loving family gathering around a fireplace. But I had peace. I had cut out the cancer. It had left a scar, a jagged, ugly thing that would ache whenever the weather changed. But the sickness was gone. I thought about the kidney inside me, the one Drew had felt entitled to. It was working perfectly. It was filtering my blood, keeping me strong, allowing me to live a life that was entirely my own. I touched my side, a subconscious gesture of protection and ownership. It is mine. I thought, my body, my money, my life. The car pulled up to the hotel. The paparazzi were waiting, flashes popping in the night. They were there for the gala, for the wealthy donors, for the spectacle. I stepped out of the car. I stood tall in my gown, the cold wind biting at my skin. I smiled for the cameras. It was not a smile of triumph. It was a smile of survival. I walked up the red carpet, alone, and for the first time, being alone did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a victory,